The Arctic wind howled through the Alaskan wilderness with a sound like shattered glass scraping across metal. At Forward Operating Base Raven, nestled 70 miles north of Deadhorse in the Brooks Range, Sergeant Mason Graves stood at the observation post, watching the sky darken to a bruised purple. The thermometer outside read -42 degrees Fahrenheit. The perpetual twilight of the polar winter made it impossible to tell if it was 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. Time had become irrelevant here on what the soldiers grimly called the Frozen Frontline. "Storm's coming in fast, Sarge." Corporal Aidan Cole appeared beside him, his breath forming crystalline clouds even inside the insulated bunker. His youthful face, weathered beyond his 26 years by 3 tours in hostile climates, was tight with concern. "Weather Service says this one's going to be a monster. Category 5 blizzard conditions. Wind speeds up to 90 miles per hour. Mason nodded slowly, his gray eyes scanning the horizon where mountains disappeared into swirling white nothingness. He'd served in Alaska for 8 years, trained elite units in Arctic warfare, survived conditions that would kill most men within hours. But something about this storm felt different. Wrong. "Get everyone inside. Full lockdown protocol," Mason ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command earned through a decade of service. "I want thermal generators at maximum, all exterior equipment secured, and emergency rations distributed to every barracks." Aidan moved quickly, his boots crunching on the ice-hardened floor. Within minutes, the alarm system echoed through the base, 3 short bursts that sent soldiers scrambling from their posts. The Frozen Frontline wasn't a traditional military installation. It was a joint training facility and early warning station, home to 47 personnel, including soldiers, researchers, and support staff. They monitored Russian activity across the Bering Strait, trained units for Arctic deployment, and conducted climate research in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Lieutenant Riley Quinn burst into the command center, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight braid, ice crystals clinging to her tactical jacket. She'd been outside securing the satellite array. "Communications are already degrading, Graves. We're losing signal integrity across all channels. I estimate we have maybe 30 minutes before we're completely cut off. Send a status report to Elmendorf Richardson now," Mason said, moving to the radio console. "Let them know we're going dark. Standard weather protocol." Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard, her green eyes reflecting the glow of multiple screens. She was the best communications specialist Mason had ever worked with, calm under pressure, brilliant with technology, and tough enough to thrive in this frozen hell. Message sent. They're acknowledging. Expected duration is 72 to 96 hours before weather clears enough for contact. The storm hit like a freight train at 16:47 hours. The wind didn't gradually increase. It exploded against the reinforced walls with such force that the entire structure shuddered. The lights flickered once, twice, then the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in harsh red illumination. Outside, visibility dropped to 0 within seconds. The world disappeared into a screaming white void. "Jesus Christ," Aidan whispered, staring through the reinforced window where nothing existed but swirling whiteness. "I've never seen anything like this." Mason had. Once. In 2019, during Operation Northern Shield, when a freak storm had buried an entire convoy under 15 feet of snow in less than 4 hours. He'd lost 3 men that day. Good men. Their frozen bodies hadn't been recovered until spring. For the next 18 hours, the storm raged with apocalyptic fury. The base held, but barely. Metal groaned under the stress. Ice formed on interior walls despite the heating systems running at full capacity. The soldiers huddled in the main barracks, playing cards, telling stories, trying to ignore the banshee shriek of wind that never stopped, not even for a second. Mason made rounds every 2 hours, checking on his people, ensuring morale stayed intact. In conditions like these, the mind could break faster than the body. He found Private Logan Reed in the medical bay, treating Specialist Harper Lane for frostbite she'd gotten during the final equipment run before lockdown. "How's she doing?" Mason asked. Logan looked up, his dark eyes tired but focused. The medic was young, only 23, but he had steady hands and a calm demeanor that made him invaluable in crisis situations. "She'll keep her fingers. Got her warmed up in time. Another 10 minutes out there, though?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Harper managed a weak smile, her face pale. "I'm fine, Sergeant, just stupid. Should have worn the heavy gloves." "Rest up," Mason said. "We're going to need everyone at full strength when this clears." But the storm didn't clear. Not after 72 hours, not after 96. It raged for 6 days straight, a meteorological impossibility that shattered every record in Arctic weather history. The snow didn't just fall, it avalanched from the sky in suffocating waves. Drifts built up against the base until the lower windows were completely buried. The world outside ceased to exist. On day 5, the first generator failed. The temperature inside the base dropped 15 degrees within an hour. Mason gathered his senior staff in the command center: Riley, Aiden, Logan, and Sergeant Dana Steele, the hard-edged logistics officer who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before requesting Arctic assignment. "We've got a problem," Dana said, her voice clipped and professional despite the visible concern in her ice-blue eyes. "Generator 2 is completely fried. The cold damaged the fuel lines, and when we tried to restart it, the whole system seized. We're running on Generator 1, and it's not designed to heat the entire facility alone." "Rations?" Mason asked. "We're okay for another week, maybe 10 days if we stretch it," Dana replied. "But that's assuming we can keep the food from freezing solid. Once temperatures drop below a certain point, even the emergency supplies become unusable." Riley's fingers danced across her laptop, pulling up weather data from the internal monitoring system since external communications remained dead. "The storm is finally weakening. Wind speeds have dropped to 40 miles per hour. We should have a window in the next 12 to 18 hours. "A window for what?" Aiden asked. Mason studied the base schematic on the wall screen. "Generator 2's backup parts are in the exterior storage depot. Building 7, 200 yards northeast." The room fell silent. 200 yards might as well have been 200 miles in these conditions. "That's a death sentence," Logan said quietly. "Visibility is still near 0. Wind chill is probably pushing -90. Exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. "We don't have a choice," Mason replied. "Without that generator, we won't last another 3 days. We'll freeze to death in our own beds." He turned to Dana. "What exactly do we need?" Dana pulled up an inventory list. "Fuel pump assembly, ignition relay, and coolant reservoir. Maybe 60 pounds of equipment total. 2 people could carry it in tactical sleds." "I'll go," Aiden said immediately. "No." Mason's voice was firm. "I need you here coordinating if something goes wrong. Riley, you're with me. Your technical expertise might be needed if we have to improvise." Riley met his gaze without flinching. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light, or what passes for it up here. We prep tonight." The next morning, if it could be called morning in the endless twilight, Mason and Riley stood in the airlock, fully suited in extreme cold weather gear. They looked like astronauts preparing for a spacewalk. Layered thermal suits, full face masks with heated visors, heavy gloves, snowshoes strapped to their backs. Each carried emergency beacons, flares, ice axes, and enough survival supplies to last 48 hours if separated from the base. "You've got 3 hours," Aiden said through the comm system, his voice crackling with static. "After that, we're coming after you. Conditions be damned." Mason nodded. "Keep the lights on for us." The outer door opened, and the cold hit like a physical blow. Even through the insulated suit, Mason felt the heat being sucked from his body. The wind, though diminished from its peak fury, still howled at a steady 35 miles per hour, driving ice crystals that felt like needles against any exposed surface. Visibility extended maybe 20 feet through the swirling white chaos. They'd rigged a guide rope from the main building to the storage depot, anchored every 10 feet. It was their lifeline, their only guarantee of finding their way back. Mason clipped his safety harness to the rope, checked that Riley had done the same, then stepped into the maelstrom. The wind tried to knock them off their feet immediately. They leaned into it, moving slowly, methodically. Each step required concentration. The snow had drifted so high that they were essentially walking on top of a new landscape. Buried vehicles, equipment, entire structures hidden beneath the white. One wrong step could send them plunging into a hidden crevasse. "How you doing?" Mason called through the comm. "Cold!" Riley shouted back, her voice barely audible over the wind. "But moving." They'd covered maybe 50 yards when Mason saw the first dog tag. It was frozen into the snow at eye level, suspended in ice that had formed around it. The metal gleamed dully in the weak light. Mason stopped, examining it without touching. The name was barely legible. SGT Hunter Briggs. "Riley, look at this." She moved closer, her breath fogging her visor. "That's impossible. Briggs is back at the base. I saw him this morning." Mason's blood ran cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. He keyed the comm to base frequency. "Aiden, confirm roster. Is Sergeant Hunter Briggs currently on base?" Static crackled for a moment, then Aiden's voice. "Affirmative. Briggs is in Barracks C. Why?" "No reason. Continue standby." They found 3 more dog tags as they pressed forward. Each one bore a name of someone currently at the base. CPL Tyler Shaw, PFC Connor Blake, SGT Ethan Ward. The tags were old, weathered, as if they'd been exposed to the elements for months or years, not days. "This doesn't make sense," Riley said, her voice tight with something close to fear. "How are these here?" Mason didn't have an answer. They kept moving, following the guide rope through the blinding white. The storage depot materialized like a ghost ship emerging from fog, a squat, reinforced building half buried in snow. The door was frozen shut. It took both of them and an ice axe to pry it open. Inside was darker than the storm outside. Mason activated his helmet light, the beam cutting through absolute blackness. The interior looked like it had been ransacked, supplies scattered, crates overturned, equipment smashed. But what made Mason's stomach turn was the message spray-painted across the far wall in what looked like dried blood. "We're still moving." Riley's scream crackled through the comm system. Mason spun to find her backing away from a corner of the depot, her helmet light illuminating something that shouldn't exist. A body, frozen solid, curled in a fetal position, wearing a uniform identical to theirs. Mason approached slowly, his heart hammering. He knelt beside it, brushing away the frost that covered the face. The features were unmistakable. It was him. Sergeant Mason Graves, frozen dead, his gray eyes open and staring at nothing. "That's not possible," Mason whispered. "I'm right here. I'm alive." Riley's breathing was rapid, verging on hyperventilation. "We need to get out of here now. Something is very wrong." But Mason couldn't move. He stared at his own corpse, his mind racing through impossible explanations. Hallucination from hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, some kind of elaborate psychological experiment? None of it made sense. Then he saw the date on the corpse's watch. March 15th, 2024, 3 months ago. "Riley, what's today's date?" "March 17th, 2024. Why are you—" She stopped. Her helmet light joined his, both beams fixed on the impossible corpse. "Oh, God!" Mason forced himself to think logically. In Arctic conditions, bodies could be preserved almost indefinitely. But this wasn't just any body. It was him, wearing the same equipment, the same unit patches, even the same scar on the left hand from a training accident 2 years ago. He keyed the comm to base. Aiden, we've got a situation at the depot. Need you to confirm something for me. What was the date when the storm hit? Static. Then, March 11th, 2024, 6 days ago. Graves, what's going on out there? 6 days. But the body showed signs of having been frozen for months, and the message on the wall, "We're still moving," was written in English, in a hand that looked disturbingly similar to his own. "We're coming back," Mason said. "Prepare the med bay. We might be experiencing environmental psychological effects." "Negative," Aiden's voice was suddenly sharp. "Graves, you need to get those generator parts. We're down to 4 hours of heat. After that, people start dying." Mason looked at Riley. Even through the face mask, he could see the terror in her eyes. But he also saw something else: determination. She was a soldier. They both were. Whatever psychological horror they were experiencing, their people needed them. "Help me find the parts," Mason said. They worked quickly, systematically searching through the chaos. The fuel pump was intact, the ignition relay relatively undamaged. But the coolant reservoir had been shattered. They'd have to improvise a replacement from the backup water storage tanks. As they gathered supplies, Mason noticed more details that made his skin crawl. More dog tags scattered around the depot, each bearing names of people currently at the base. Equipment that looked decades old despite having been stored for only months, and scratched into the metal walls over and over, coordinates 69, 4167 degree N, 149, 1231 Igral W. "Those are our current coordinates," Riley said quietly. "Someone marked our exact location." "Multiple times," Mason added, like they were trying to remember or warn someone. They loaded the parts onto the sleds, secured everything with bungee cords, then prepared for the return journey. Mason took one last look at his frozen doppelganger. In the corpse's pocket, partially visible, was a piece of paper. He pulled it free, the frozen material crackling in his gloved hands. It was a letter, written in his own handwriting. "If you're reading this, you're me. Or you will be. The storm isn't natural, it's a loop. We've been here before, 73 times by my count. Each time we try to survive. Each time we fail. The only way out is to break the pattern. Don't trust your memories. They're not all yours. Some belong to versions of you that already died. The message on the wall isn't a threat, it's a promise. We're still moving. We're still trying. Don't give up. The answer is in the..." The letter ended abruptly, torn or unfinished. Mason folded it carefully and tucked it into his inner pocket. He didn't tell Riley. Not yet. She was barely holding it together as it was. The journey back to base was a nightmare. The wind had picked up again, and the guide rope was coated in ice, making it slippery and treacherous. Twice, Mason nearly lost his grip. The sleds caught on hidden obstacles, flipping and requiring precious minutes to right and reload. And always, in the peripheral vision, shapes moved through the storm. Figures that might have been snowdrifts or might have been something else. When they finally reached the airlock, both of them collapsed inside, gasping for breath. Aiden and Logan were there immediately, helping them out of the frozen suits, checking for frostbite. "Did you get the parts?" Aiden asked. Mason nodded, too exhausted to speak. Dana appeared, already examining the equipment, nodding with approval. "This will work. Give me 2 hours and I'll have Generator 2 operational." But as the warmth of the base seeped back into his bones, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The other soldiers looked at him strangely, as if seeing something in his face that hadn't been there before. And in the reflection of the polished metal wall, just for a second, he could have sworn he saw his own corpse staring back. Mason didn't sleep that night. He sat in the command center alone, reading and rereading the letter from his frozen self. 73 loops. 73 times they'd lived through this nightmare and died. But if that were true, why didn't he remember? Why did this feel like the first time? He pulled up the base's digital logs, going back through entries from the past week. Everything seemed normal: routine weather reports, standard personnel logs, maintenance records. But then he noticed something odd. The handwriting in the physical logbook, the one kept as backup in case of digital failure, changed subtly every few entries, as if different people had written it. People with his handwriting, but slight variations in pressure, letter formation, spacing. You found it too. Mason spun to find Riley standing in the doorway, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Found what? The inconsistencies. I've been going through the communications logs. We received a distress signal 3 days ago from a research station 200 miles east, Station Sierra 9. They reported catastrophic equipment failure and casualties. She moved closer, pulling up a file on the computer. But here's the thing. Station Sierra 9 doesn't exist. I checked every database. There's no facility at those coordinates. Never has been. So where did the signal come from? That's what I've been trying to figure out. She pulled up another screen, this one showing audio waveform analysis. I ran the voice through recognition software, the person calling for help, identifying himself as Commander Cole Bennett. She paused, her hands shaking slightly. It's Aiden. It's Aiden's voice, but older. Maybe 10 or 15 years older. Mason felt the world tilting beneath him. That's impossible? Is it? More impossible than finding your own corpse in a storage depot? More impossible than dog tags of living people frozen in ice? Riley's voice was rising, edging toward panic. Something is happening here, Graves. Something we don't understand, and I think it's happened before. Mason showed her the letter. She read it in silence, her face growing paler with each word. A loop, she whispered. We're stuck in some kind of time loop. I don't believe in science fiction, Mason said firmly. There has to be a rational explanation. Then explain the date on your corpse's watch. Explain the dog tags. Explain how I have memories of conversations we never had, of events that don't match the logs. Riley grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. 2 days ago, or what I remember as 2 days ago, you gave me a letter. Told me to keep it safe. Do you remember that? Mason didn't. But when Riley pulled a sealed envelope from her jacket pocket and handed it to him, he recognized his own handwriting on the outside. Open when you understand. His hand shook as he tore it open. Inside was a detailed map of the base and surrounding area with specific locations marked. And a message. The storm is real, but what's causing it isn't natural. There's a military weather experiment station buried under the ice, Project Polaris. They were testing atmospheric manipulation technology in 2019. Something went wrong. The base was evacuated and buried, but the equipment is still running, creating a localized temporal distortion field. Every time we die in the storm, we loop back to March 11th. We've tried everything, shutting down the generators, evacuating on foot, rationing supplies. It always ends the same. The only way to break the loop is to find Project Polaris and shut down the equipment manually. The entrance is hidden 3 miles north. The coordinates are... The rest was smudged, illegible. This is insane, Mason said, but even as he spoke, fragments of memories were surfacing. Not his memories, memories from other versions of himself, dying in the storm, freezing in his sleep, watching others die, living this nightmare over and over. A loud bang echoed through the base, then another. Dana's voice crackled over the intercom. Generator 2 is back online. We've got full power. There was celebration in the barracks, cheering, laughter, relief. But Mason felt none of it. He looked at Riley, saw the same grim understanding in her eyes. If we're in a loop, she said quietly, getting the generator fixed doesn't matter. We'll still die. We'll still reset, unless we stop the source. Then we stop the source, Mason replied. He pulled up the base roster, studying each name. Aiden Cole, Logan Reed, Dana Steele, Harper Lane, Tyler Shaw, Hunter Briggs, good soldiers, his responsibility. But we can't do it alone. We need help. How do we convince them? That we're living the same week over and over? That we've all died multiple times? Mason thought about the dog tags, the corpses, the impossible evidence scattered across the frozen landscape. We show them the truth. All of it. He called an emergency meeting, every person on base crowded into the main briefing room. For the next hour, Mason laid out everything: the discoveries at the depot, the letter from his future self, Riley's evidence of temporal anomalies, the theory about Project Polaris. He expected skepticism, disbelief, mockery. What he got instead were nods of recognition. "I've been having dreams," Aiden said slowly. "The same dream every night. I'm older, gray-haired, and I'm recording a message. Warning someone about a station that doesn't exist. I thought I was losing my mind. I keep finding notes in my handwriting that I don't remember writing," Logan added. "Instructions for treating injuries that haven't happened yet. But they feel familiar, like I've treated them before." One by one, the soldiers shared their experiences. Déjà vu so strong it felt like memory, skills they didn't remember learning, knowledge they shouldn't possess. They'd all felt it, all dismissed it as stress or fatigue or the psychological strain of Arctic isolation. But it was real. They were all ghosts, echoes of themselves, living and dying in an endless cycle. "So what do we do?" Dana asked, her voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. "How do we break the loop?" Mason spread the map across the table. "We find Project Polaris, we shut it down, and we do it before the storm kills us again." They left at dawn, or what passed for dawn, in the perpetual twilight. 8 soldiers volunteered for the mission: Mason, Riley, Aiden, Logan, Dana, Harper, along with Privates Jordan Cross and Morgan Shaw. The remaining personnel would maintain the base, conserve resources, and serve as backup if the team didn't return. The storm had weakened significantly, but conditions were still brutal. Wind chill hovered at -70. Visibility extended maybe 100 yards. They traveled in pairs, roped together, each carrying emergency supplies and specialized equipment. Logan brought medical gear. Dana carried explosives in case they needed to breach underground structures. Riley had her communications equipment, hoping to establish contact with the outside world once they moved beyond whatever field was causing the temporal distortion. The journey north was surreal. They passed landmarks that Mason remembered from previous loops: a crashed helicopter that shouldn't be there, frozen soldiers in uniforms from decades past, equipment from military operations that were never officially recorded. The landscape was a graveyard of failed attempts. Alternate timelines collapsed into one impossible reality. "How many times do you think we've done this?" Harper asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. 73, Mason replied, according to the letter. "Maybe more." "And we never succeeded?" "We never succeeded. But we're still moving. Still trying. That has to count for something." 3 miles felt like 30 in the Arctic conditions. They'd been moving for 2 hours when Jordan, who had been studying the terrain with GPS equipment, suddenly stopped. "Found it. There's a thermal anomaly 50 yards ahead, underground structure generating heat." They approached cautiously, weapons drawn despite the absurdity of expecting enemy contact. What they found was a reinforced hatch, half buried in ice, marked with faded military insignia and a date: Project Polaris, EST 2019. Dana placed shaped charges around the seal. "Everyone back! This is going to be loud!" The explosion echoed across the frozen wasteland like thunder. The hatch blew inward, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Heat rose from below, a shocking contrast to the brutal cold above. "I'll go first," Mason said. "Riley, you're with me. Everyone else maintain perimeter until we signal all clear." The ladder descended 30 feet into a tunnel that opened into a massive underground facility. Emergency lighting flickered, casting everything in sickly green illumination. The air was stale but breathable, heated by generators that had been running autonomously for 5 years. The facility was larger than Mason had imagined. Corridors branching in multiple directions, laboratories filled with equipment he didn't recognize, living quarters for a staff that had long since evacuated. And at the center, in a massive chamber that must have been carved from solid rock, was the device. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. A cylindrical structure 30 feet tall, covered in displays and control panels, surrounded by electromagnetic coils that hummed with barely contained energy. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion, or maybe something else. "This is it," Riley breathed. "This is what's been causing the loop." Mason approached the main control panel. The displays showed incomprehensible data. Atmospheric pressure readings in the negative, temporal variance measurements, electromagnetic frequencies that shouldn't exist, and a counter ticking upward, 73 cycles completed. 73, Mason said, just like the letter said. "We've been through this 73 times. "So how do we shut it down?" Riley asked, already examining the controls. "Carefully," said a voice behind them. They spun to find Aiden climbing down the ladder, his face grim. "I'm coming with you. The others are secure topside." He moved to stand beside Mason, staring at the device. "So this is what's been killing us over and over." "Not killing us," Mason corrected. "Trapping us. There's a difference." Riley was working frantically, her fingers flying across keyboards, pulling up system diagnostics. "This is incredibly advanced. It's not just creating weather patterns, it's creating localized temporal bubbles. Every time we die within the field's radius, our consciousness resets to the moment the storm begins. But we carry forward fragments of memory, instincts, skills learned from previous iterations." "Can you shut it down?" Mason asked. "Yes, but—" Riley hesitated. "It's going to destabilize violently. The accumulated temporal energy has to go somewhere. When I initiate shutdown, we'll have maybe 10 minutes to evacuate the area before the field collapses." "Then we better move fast," Aiden said. Riley's hands moved with practiced precision, entering override codes, disabling safety protocols. Alarms began to wail. The device's hum increased in pitch, becoming almost painful. The counter on the screen began to flash. "Field collapse imminent." "Go!" Riley shouted. "Everyone out now!" They ran. Up the ladder into the Arctic cold that felt almost warm after the stifling heat of the facility. Mason grabbed the radio. "All personnel, this is Graves. We're evacuating. Move south back to base, maximum speed." The ground beneath them began to shake. The shaking intensified, and a sound like breaking glass filled the air. Not physical glass, but reality itself, fracturing. The storm, which had been weakening, suddenly stopped. Completely. The wind died. The snow ceased falling. The perpetual twilight brightened to something approaching normal daylight for the first time in days. And then, the world lurched. Mason felt it in his bones. The sensation of time snapping back into place, like a rubber band that had been stretched too far suddenly released. Memories flooded his mind, not just from this loop, but from all 73 previous iterations. Every death, every failure, every desperate attempt to break free. He remembered freezing to death, starving, being buried alive in snow, dying of hypothermia while trying to reach help. 73 different versions of himself, all trying, all failing, all leaving clues for the next iteration. "Do you feel that?" Aiden gasped on his knees in the snow. I remember all of it." "So do I," Riley said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Every loop, every death. We've been living and dying here for, God, it must be years." Subjective years, trapped in the same week. Behind them, the entrance to Project Polaris collapsed inward with a roar. The facility was destroying itself, the accumulated temporal energy tearing it apart from the inside. They ran, stumbling through the snow, pushing themselves beyond exhaustion. The landscape around them was changing. Impossible structures that had existed only in loop space were fading, disappearing, leaving behind only pristine Arctic wilderness. When they finally reached the base, the other soldiers emerged to meet them. On their faces was the same expression of dawning realization, memories returning, the weight of 73 deaths and resurrections settling into their consciousness. "We broke it," Dana said, wonder in her voice. "We actually broke the loop." Mason activated his radio, switching to the emergency frequency. For a week, or 73 weeks, depending on perspective, there had been nothing but static. Now, for the first time, a clear voice came through. "Forward Operating Base Raven. This is Elmendorf Richardson Command. We've been trying to reach you for 6 days. What is your status?" 6 days. Not 73 loops. Not years of subjective time. Just 6 days in the real world. Mason lifted the radio to his mouth, searching for words adequate to explain the impossible. "Elmendorf Richardson, this is Sergeant Mason Graves. We're still moving. Request immediate extraction for all personnel. We have a situation that requires full debriefing." "Copy that, Raven. Extraction team is already en route. They'll reach you within 4 hours. Good to hear your voice, Graves. We were starting to think you were ghosts." Mason looked at his team, at Aiden, Riley, Logan, Dana, Harper, and the others. They'd died together 73 times. They'd fought together, suffered together, remembered together. They were ghosts in a way Command would never understand. Ghosts who had refused to stop moving, to stop trying, until they found a way to break free. "Not ghosts," Mason replied. "Just soldiers doing our job. Raven out." The extraction helicopters arrived as promised, massive Chinooks that landed in the cleared space near the base. The crew looked at them strangely. These soldiers who'd survived a week in impossible conditions, who carried themselves with the weight of experiences no one else would believe. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the frozen front line, Mason looked back at the Arctic landscape. Somewhere under all that ice and snow, the ruins of Project Polaris were collapsing, the temporal distortion field finally destroyed. The loop was broken. They were free. But the memories remained. 73 lifetimes of struggle, compressed into 1 week. They'd carry those ghosts with them forever, not supernatural specters, but the echoes of their own repeated deaths, their own refusal to surrender. Riley sat beside him, her hand finding his. No words were necessary. They'd said everything that needed to be said across 73 loops. "What do we tell them?" Aiden asked from across the cargo hold. "Command, the debriefing teams, what do we say happened?" Mason thought about it for a long moment. The truth was impossible, unbelievable, but it was still the truth. "We tell them exactly what happened," he said finally. "We fought a storm that tried to kill us. We found a way to survive. And when that wasn't enough, we found a way to win. The rest," he shrugged, "the rest is above our pay grade." The helicopter climbed higher, leaving the frozen front line behind. Below, the Arctic stretched endlessly, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to human suffering. But they'd survived it. Not just once, but 74 times. They'd earned their escape. As Alaska disappeared behind them and civilization approached ahead, Mason allowed himself something he hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime: hope. The loop was broken. The nightmare was over. They were still moving, but this time they were moving forward, into whatever came next.